The following is a production of UNO Television for KYNE TV. Consider This with Carol Schrader, a news and information program recorded on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. From the Fireside Lounge in the Milo Bale Student Center, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Hello and welcome to the Milo Bale Student Center, the heart of it on the UNO campus. Consider this. We heard in the last several elections we've got to have welfare reform, and a lot of Americans bought into it. Well, we are getting welfare reform, and we're not even a half year into it in Nebraska, and we're going to talk with some people who are looking at how it's working out and the implications. I want to thank them for joining me first today. Our first guest is Chris Morrissey. She's Director of Policy at Voices for Children Nebraska, a child advocacy group that looks at many of the aspects of children and their welfare in the state. Milo Mumgard is Executive Director of the Nebraska Appleseed Center. They compile a lot of information and I suppose are interested in public policy with regard to issues that affect the impoverished folks in our state. Marilyn Serwinski is Job Support Coordinator for Health and Human Services, and the job component is one of the keys of welfare reform. Thanks a lot. Marilyn, because you are a state official in a sense, so that makes you official.
Makes me official.
I'm going to ask you to give us a thumbnail sketch. I know numbers hardly tell the story at all, but maybe historically the last 5-6 years, or throw out some numbers of what we're talking about. If folks on, define it. Are we talking about AFDC, food stamps when we talk about welfare?
Welfare reform started in Nebraska in 1995 in two areas, one the Hastings area and then the Lincoln area. In Omaha, which is Douglas-Sarpy County, it started in October of last year. What we have is temporary assistance to needy families. That's TANF. And that's replaced the ADC grant and the ADC program. So it's a block grant of money given to the state to provide cash assistance to families. Right now in the Omaha area, we have approximately 6,500 families on TANF assistance, but not all of those families are mandatory for employment first.
So ADC
just kind of changed.
Is out in terms of, we just don't use that, but there is aid to dependent families with children in the form of TANF.
TANF, right.
All right, now, the big thing, and I know we all heard it during the elections, was we need to get these people to get a job. We need, the more strident ones is just kind of a get a job theme. Moving a little maybe toward the left, or the more humanistic approach was let's get these people employable so that they can, and I hate that, get our welfare recipients employable so that they can be proud of themselves, earn a living, set an example for their children. Get them into the mainstream so that they can be part of this country as we picture ourselves.
Exactly, and that's what we're doing in the Omaha area. We're focusing on intensive case management. We're working in partnership with our clients to help them overcome the barriers that have been traditionally keeping them from obtaining and keeping a job. Most of our participants have employment history. There's just barriers, transportation barriers, childcare in the evenings for ill children, that type of thing. And so we're working in partnership with our clients so that we can move them to economic independence.
I want to get everyone in the act here, but just one more sort of statistical question is that when you look at all the people that were on, mothers, fathers with children that were on the welfare rolls, obviously all of those people are not employable. In fact, by their very nature, they were on welfare because perhaps they had a physical or a mental condition or something like that. So what, divide the pie up in terms of those that we get percentage-wise could expect to get jobs and hold employment, and those that, won't be able to, at least not in the short term.
Right. We have certain exemptions from participating in employment first, and as you mentioned, if they're disabled, incapacitated, if they're pregnant in the third trimester, they're not required to participate in the program. So we have several exemptions that people could fall into. We also have what we call time-limited and non-time-limited benefits. Non-time limited benefits are for the grandmother payees or for parents who for some reason are not included in the cash assistance grant and not through a sanction process. So those folks aren't even included in the Employment First area.
All right, Chris and Milo, and Marilyn, as we moved into this process, let's quickly go over some of the biggest fears and concerns and see how those are being worked on. Chris?
Well, I think one of the biggest concerns we as child advocates had are that the majority of our poor children in Nebraska are already living in families that work. And so our fear was that we didn't want to just see welfare reform move families off of cash assistance into low-paying jobs,
And remaining in poverty.
Exactly, moving them from welfare into the ranks of the working poor. And so that had been a concern from the very beginning. And as we worked on this policy with the state, with the governor's office, we continued to stress there needed to be safety net services such as child care and health care, and that the job training component shouldn't just be a job search component, shouldn't just be a this is how you do an interview and this is how you fill out an application, that there should really be some assessment as to what sort of skills do you have, and is there an effective training that we could get you into that might get you a job paying more than $5 or $6 an hour. And Milo can probably talk a little bit more about living wage, but those were some of our main concerns, and we continue to come back with those. I don't think we're completely satisfied that families are necessarily getting into jobs that are paying living wages. They're getting into jobs and they're showing successes in the pilot communities, getting into positions, but what those wages are, we don't have an evaluation back yet to see if they have benefits and
Hold that
good
thought.
wages.
Hold that thought. Milo, what were some of the concerns of Appleseed?
Well, when you earlier referred to these people, I think it's a common way of talking about
Yeah, and
this
I feel
population.
bad, but
because this really is it's just a flowing and definite part of the working poor population in our state. We have a lot of people in Nebraska, a lot of families, tremendous number of families who work for a below poverty wage or below a living wage. And there is a lot of families that at times need to have welfare assistance. And those are that's the population we're talking about. And there is, of course, about 25–30% of that population that has disabilities and has other barriers that really means they're not employable. But of the population we're talking about, for some odd reason, we've now created a public policy that says they need to be on time limits in order to get them to work, in order to get them to do things in the workforce. That's not at all the situation for Nebraska's working poor population that needs welfare assistance. These folks work. They just aren't they just aren't making very much money when they're working. So therefore, the kinds of things Chris is talking about is very key to having a successful welfare reform program, because the time limits don't make a whole lot of sense given the context we're working in. Given that we have time limits as part of the program now, how are we making sure that people are going to be given the opportunities to gain the training, the skills, the child care assistance, the health care assistance that will actually enable them to become somebody who can be economically self-sufficient, to once and for all get out of the working poor population that they won't need welfare assistance anymore. Here at UNO, you've got a significant number of young women with children who are going to school, who are welfare recipients, who are now on time limits, and they're faced with a barrier of, well, gee, how am I going to finish my education so that I can get a decent job that will get me out of this working poverty situation. You've got at Metro Community College, you've got a ton of people over there. So those are the kinds of issues that we have to wrestle with in the context of the population we're dealing with, which again is not a bunch of people just sitting around eating bonbons, taking welfare in, which of course was the distorted and stereotypical view that was motivating the whole politics of all this. Instead, how do we actually manufacture public policy that makes sense?
Now we all turn to Marilyn Jones. But job support, let's just talk the job component, not the transportation and the children at this point. What mechanism did we put in place to try to anticipate some of these things, at least from the job perspective?
Okay. Our Employment First program, which has replaced the job support program in Nebraska, is based on a strength-based assessment in partnership with the client. The client comes in, sits down with the case manager, and they form a partnership to discuss what are the strengths that this client brings to the situation. Okay, so we move from that part into what can we do then with your strengths to move you to economic independence. And how are we going to do that? And what are your ideas? So we totally involve the client. They just don't come in and we say, okay, now you have to do this, this, and this, and you'll be just fine. We actually ask the client, and we need the client's input. We can't do an employment plan without their input. So basically the client is coming in, writing out their goals, short-term, long-term. We provide the supportive services to help them meet those goals, and we help them identify and overcome the barriers to employment.
All right, that seems very logical to me and very, very human. And in other words, not I've got 10 jobs here, 10 people.
Right.
There you go. How does it appear to be working at this point?
Well, right now, we just finished training our Employment First Unit staff. They ended February 28th. They have all of their training. They already have 15 contracts signed in their unit. And this is not a matter of getting self-sufficiency contracts signed as quickly as possible.
Is this contract between the Department of Human Services
Yes.
and
And the
by the
client.
client, you mean the person that was on
Yes, the
receiving
recipient.
the check?
The wage earner, the adult in the family, right? Because again, we're dealing
as
here
opposed
with
to
all
a client
families.
corporation that maybe is,
Right.
you know, helping in somehow.
And I'm sorry, I should have said that.
It's the jargon, you know.
It's our TANF recipient would become a participant in Employment First.
All right, so we don't really know yet how.
We don't know the long-term effects yet.
We don't know in Omaha. We do know something about Lincoln and Hastings because those are the two areas that had the activities implemented in November of '95 or thereabouts. And the initial evaluations that came back, based upon what was happening in Lincoln and Hastings, was that, well, shoot, we do a pretty good job of matching people up with jobs. The problem, though, is we don't do a very good job of helping them become economically self-sufficient. That is, that's never really been the problem in Nebraska, is getting people to go out and look for work and get jobs. It's been a problem of how do we help them get jobs and then help them move in the direction of becoming ultimately earning a living wage and being economically self-sufficient. So the evaluations that have been done in Lincoln and Hastings have been very critical in the sense that they say, well, how do we can match people with jobs, how do we though match them up or get them into a position where they're going to in the long term become self-sufficient?
Because we have had a situation, particularly if you look at Omaha and Lincoln, where the unemployment is very low and there are employers screaming for people. And to some degree, there has been some wage inflation based on, you know, the shortage of workers. But still, I can't imagine taking some of those lowest paying jobs and feeding a family. Not that the welfare check did all, you know, was the panacea.
Right.
But I mean, I look and my friends and I, we talk about this welfare reform. We say, how do you do that? Then you don't. Do you still have Medicaid? What if you don't have a car that works? Place to put the kids. I mean, people that make a lot of money can't find child care.
That's right. And child care, the state has done some advances in child care. They have increased the level of subsidy. They have a sliding fee scale. And formerly, if you were under about 120% or under 100% of poverty, you could get on the sliding fee scale and receive a subsidy, or if you were on welfare. Now they've increased that, so a family can earn up to 185% of the poverty level and still participate in some way with the child care subsidy.
If you can find child care.
That's right. We were at a meeting yesterday and I was talking about how wonderful this sliding fee scale program was and how it's reaching out to more families. And a woman who has formerly been on public assistance said, but the biggest barrier is finding child care providers who will take the Title 20 subsidies, because how it works is the parent would pay the child care provider their part of the fee, and then the child care provider bills the state. And some child care providers don't believe that the reimbursement is high enough. There might not be enough in one particular location. There's a number of issues. And like you said, it's difficult for the person making $35,000 a year to find a child care facility they feel is safe, that they feel is quality, that they trust, and they're willing to pay out $120 a week for their infant child care. When you're low income and don't have quite that kind of subsidy coming in, finding those child care providers is just as difficult.
So what are we doing? Because I know in certain areas of town, well, almost all areas of town, it's difficult to find child care, but I imagine if you suddenly have an influx of people who need child care, I mean, it just is logical that there's going to be at least a short-term shortage.
Well, that's indeed true, and that's been one of the major league concerns about the folks who've been working on these issues the last several years, is that in changing the rules, creating a new welfare reform program that pushes more people into the labor market quicker than previously and requires more and more child care demand, or more and more child care, the demand will go up, and we don't even have enough child care as it is. Even though Nebraska's never had a waiting list per se for child care, at least that's a big claim, you can predict that in the near future, particularly in Omaha, given the sheer numbers that we're talking about here in the next year, I would imagine there will be in effect, a waiting list of people looking for child care.
Are we doing anything to anticipate that? Because I know that in many areas of town where there is you can geographically pinpoint, and I think Midwest Child Care could show you where the child care is and isn't. To anticipate that, to encourage people or solicit even home care and maybe some subsidies for safety issues, because that's, I mean, even if you wanted to become employed by going into child care and you were the best mom and surrogate mom in the world, you have to have proper transportation and child care seats and fire extinguishers and
the whole shebang. You bet.
Exactly. And I'm not really qualified to comment on that. We do have a special area in Omaha, our resource development unit, who takes care of the child care. And I know that they're looking into those issues.
The state does, the state recognizes this as a problem. I don't want to say that they've turned an eye.
That's good.
They recognize that they need to find these child care providers, and so they're doing a couple of things. One is that the state does have some grant funds available that if a person wants to establish a child care center or child in their home, they can apply for some grant funds, and especially when we're looking at rural communities, there are certain rules about farm equipment, and you have to have fences up, and I mean some of these things that we wouldn't think about in Omaha.
I wouldn't have thought of that.
And so there are some grant dollars available. It's just a matter of reaching out, letting people know those dollars are available, letting the state communicating that we can help you get established. And then there are also some nonprofits. Lincoln Action Program has a specific program called the Jolly Program, and they work with low-income women who are leaving welfare and training them in child care, helping them establish home child care facilities within their home as a way of getting employed, earning money, and then also helping out and reaching out other families that need help. So there's some work going on in that area.
So we're looking at that, and we're anticipating the problems.
And it has to be anticipated because in every instance we're talking about here, there's a mother or sometimes a father and children, and that's the whole bottom line here. Is there always are children in this picture? And
that's something that cannot be removed from the equation. As much as some people would like it to be,
absolutely,
it doesn't happen.
Absolutely.
What about transportation? And talking to my friends and networking buddies and officials in North and South Omaha. Let's take Omaha and the most impoverished area, density. Transportation to jobs. There aren't always the jobs in those parts of town. There's a lot of demand out even west of 72nd Street. In restaurants, hospitals, all kinds of things. And I mean, I never know if my car's going to start from one day to the next, so I can appreciate that.
What we do when we do the assessment process and the employment plan with the client, we talk to them about their transportation issues. And as far as supportive services, we can always give bus tickets and gas vouchers, that type of thing. But we want to be able to look at the whole issue and what happens if you have a car that doesn't run. So we're looking at backup and support systems for our participants. Transportation is a very, very major issue in Omaha. To get a bus from one part of town to the other part of town, or even a cab, depending, there's certain problems with that whole issue, and our department is looking into working with other agencies as far as setting up different types of options for transportation. We have a job developer that's going out and talking to employers and finding out if they can perhaps provide a van service for employees in a special pickup point, and even carpooling among employees.
When the governor started this, he called for a public-private partnership, and I think that it's going out to those businesses. I mean, if you listen on the radio any given day, they're advertising for job availability, and it's for jobs that are available. Now, whether they pay a living wage and have benefits is another question, but it's getting some of those private businesses to be willing to establish some shuttle services and some pickup sites, working with Matt to do that, to extend their hours or to have a special drop off at a place that currently isn't a stop. And there is some work going on in those areas, but probably not enough. I mean, as we look at 6,500 families in Omaha, not that they will all be employment first, but there's a lot more work that needs to be done.
In fact, I remember hearing not only the governor, but prior to that the president and many far-seeing congressmen and senators saying that it had to be a public-private. I'm sure the people in Omaha were going, employers that have been screaming for lower skill employees were saying, oh great, this is going to be great, we're going to have a job pool.
Oh yeah,
Grand.
absolutely.
But has the private sector come through with, I don't mean that they should just, open the cash register and start, but I mean, have they come through? Is there a private component that is working on problem solving here?
I think through our Private Industry Council with the City of Omaha, the PIC, is working with JTGO and with the state of Nebraska, Health and Human Services here. So we're trying to work it out. It's a large endeavor, and it's not going to happen overnight. And I think the community's interested, they're behind it, but we're all just kind of wanting to know what our part is. And so we get together and we're discussing that.
Of course, though, you're exactly right earlier by saying that employers in this city are crying out for employees that have skills, that are able to do certain things. This is a labor pool that can be tapped into for that very purpose. And those are jobs, in fact, that probably do either pay a living wage or are tracking into living wage employment in some high tech and so on.
But then you bring up what you brought up before about the education
Absolutely.
quandary. It's a horse, cart before the horse before the cart situation. And wasn't there just a really heart-tugging case with the governor, and I think this was in Lincoln, a young woman that was studying, but she was forced to cut that short and get a job. It was pretty publicized. She's saying, wait a minute, I'm trying to get the education, I'm getting good grades so that I can get a job that's more than poverty level.
That's absolutely right, and that's one of the things that we've been stressing for a couple years now, and it's a big part of our advocacy right now, is to make sure that the state actually is allowing, in effect, the opportunity to gain these educational opportunities and to gain the skills. To cut people off at the pass and say, no, you have to go out. You do have marketable job skills in our market, the labor market, and you need to go out and find a job. Everybody on welfare right now, practically speaking, has marketable job skills in our labor market right now. The key question is, are they going to have job skills that can lead them to an employment situation that gets them up and out of the welfare system altogether? That's the key question, and that really is the welfare reform question.
And I know people might say, well, they've been on welfare, they've got jobs, now they want an education, and, my kid can't afford an education, or I'm working part-time and going to school. Do we have anything, some sort of programs in the middle where if you're working, and even though it's not the greatest wage in the world and you're really struggling, that will help you out getting that 9 hours at Metro or UNO, either babysitting, something. We're putting $2 million in the brain gain or lack of brain drain program or whatever, which is great. We want to keep the high-end people in Nebraska, but I'm wondering if we don't need to look at that other end and say the education component, continuing education is as important for that end of the spectrum as it is for anyone else.
I would wholly agree, and I think and to some degree that's what the state is now doing, for example, with its expansion of the child care subsidies. One of the points that we keep making over and over is exactly the point that you're making, which is this is not a problem just of these people who have literally no income and need welfare assistance. This is a problem of people who have little income or not enough income.
Well, in this day of technology,
absolutely.
It's a problem for just about everybody.
Right. And how do we deal with that big problem across the board? And that's some of the things the state is doing.
Okay, we've got just a few minutes left, and I want to, since we're so new at this, and we theoretically know some of the pitfalls, but we haven't seen them all in place yet, and the strengths of the program. If people, let's say companies are interested in getting more information on how can we be a part, we need workers, we need to help, who do they call? I mean, Does anybody call you, or do you just have to
They
go out and
call all
recruit
the
them?
time. No, they
I mean, what-
call all the time.
How do they?
Basically, when they call, I refer them to our job development specialist, and she goes out and she talks to them, finds out the positions, the benefits, the transportation to where they're at, child care facilities nearby.
Okay, the worst thing is finding the right phone number, and I just give me the name of the office. People will call me. I will tell you.
Okay, you can have my phone number.
So, I can give them your.
Yes, you
It's
can.
Department of Health and Human Services in Omaha. They can probably get them to the right
Yes.
person.
Yes.
Okay, now what about the people that are concerned more from the theoretical end that you folks are concerned? Is there a place with Voices for Children or Appleseed or other groups to get some either non-profit organizations more involved, or with Department of Health and Human Services, or individuals?
Voices for Children and the Appleseed Center have been cooperating on a project called Welfare Watch, and you can contact either of our offices. We are located in Omaha, and Milo and his office are in Lincoln, and
Is that part of the National Welfare Watch program?
No, it's
there
really
a
just something we did in the state, and we just had a meeting yesterday, for example, and we're trying to monitor policy. And one of the things we're also looking at is trying to get those anecdotal stories from women, from families that are going through the system. Milo's office does have some ability to assist these families if their due process rights and some of those things are not occurring, to work with these families and hold the state accountable to what they promised in policy and what they promised in statute.
That's correct.
Well, that's great. You want to add something, Milo?
No, I think that's absolutely right. And yesterday we had a great meeting of about 35 nonprofit representatives, some state officials, some folks who are with public assistance backgrounds and so on, to get together and talk about where are we right now with welfare reform.
And if we can get some Medicaid help for our lower income folks, for their children, I think worrying about their health and paying for that is huge. And I'm speaking as a parent.
There is no doubt.
Right, go ahead.
The children's health insurance expansion and the child care expansion is no doubt the two most favorable things that's happened in quite a while.
I want to thank you all for being with us. This is a complex situation we didn't arrive at overnight, and we need a lot of patience, but we have to remember there are people, human beings involved in this. Even the employers are human beings, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's a tough cookie to crack, and I thank you, and thank you for your help.
Thank
Chris
you.
Morrissey of Voices for Children, Milo Mumgard of the Nebraska Appleseed Center, and Marilyn Sterwinski of the Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services. Thank you very much. And call Marilyn or call me and get the number if you'd like more information. For those of you who have seen a number flashing on the screen on Thursday night, please call it if you have comments. Thank you for joining us on Consider This.